Hey friends, I want to do a video review or a movie review here with you, but I think maybe more importantly, I want to tie it into some current events that are happening here in the state of California where I live, and why this story is so important, why it needs to continue to be read and retold, and what we need to glean from it. The movie is Fahrenheit 451, and listen, I read this as a young kid. I discovered reading early in my life and had a great passion for it. Loved reading, was an avid reader, and still do enjoy reading. But and then as a young kid, when I discovered certain genres, science fiction being one of them, and I found you know some of Ray Bradbury's works and Fahrenheit 451. Man, I remember just latching onto that story. I loved it. It had a powerful, impactful message. I remember as a young kid reading it. So so last night, my wife and I saw that there's a version, a sort of a recent version of this, and she had never, I discovered, had never read the story, read the book Fahrenheit 451, which kind of blew my mind because she's also been an avid reader all of her life. So we watched it. Um, and so I do want to review the film version. There was an earlier version made, I think, in the 60s. This one was made this year. The director was Ramin Barani, and starring Michael Jordan, Michael Shannon, I think, was in here also. Um, Actors that you would recognize from other film or television. Anyway, there were some things that I did like about Mr. Barani's sort of retelling here of the story, and then some things that I think were real misses here, and I think that's unfortunate because it's such an important story about um, the freedom of speech and the freedom of thought and expression, and why um, tyrannical governments really view that freedom as a threat to their power. So, Fahrenheit 451. Let's just talk about the movie, some things that I did like about it. One, I just thought in general, the filmmaking, the style was very contemporary. It sort of would draw in um, a modern audience well. So I thought that was good. I thought some of his takes on the technology uh, were good. I liked it that he tried to make it meaningful to um, the technological advances that we would recognize and sort of put a spin on it, like devices sort of akin to Alexa, other things like that. Drones were used alongside the firefighters. So he brought in pieces of technology and development that we would recognize, but with a futuristic spin on it, and how those things were being incorporated by the central government to sort of oppress and keep people mentally, so to speak, in a box. So those were, I think, good things. The bits though where I feel like the director missed it were in some of the unfortunately, and the bad piece about this critique is it really goes to the heart of the story itself, because it's one thing to retell a story in a way that sort of you try to freshen it up a little bit or make it contemporary, little things like that. But when you go right into the heart of a story and you start changing um, crucial pieces of it just for um, sort of social justice messaging type of a thing, and you start removing pieces of it that were central to the story, and you sort of wonder why would you do that? it leaves you with the question of, has the director himself become susceptible to the very core issues that the book itself is trying to address? Does that make sense? Okay, so let me be specific. In the story, Fahrenheit 451. Now, granted, it's been many years since I've read the story, but I feel like when I was reading the story that the Bible did play as one of the books that were banned and being burned. The Bible was one of those books, and that the main character himself was trying to memorize some parts of the Bible in the course of the story, even though it was his job to destroy books. But he got his hands on one, and reading it and trying to memorize pieces of it became a piece of that inner conflict in him as a character that drove him ultimately to make a massive shift in the direction of his character, of his career, of his life, and everything. The Bible was a piece of that. And in this movie, the Bible was completely removed from the story. And I'm not sure why. The director felt that he ought to do that when the author of the story had, his reasons for making that a piece of it. So that sort of struck me as an unusual choice, and a rather specific one. The other one was that several of the main characters in the story who were either male or whatever were turned into female characters. Okay, so whatever. I mean, I don't really have a problem with that. It's just that when you start compiling up these changes, it gives you this sort of picture of a director who's changing things or editing things out of a book whose main point was about censorship and about changing things because they're offensive to certain groups of people. And yet we're seeing these very kinds of things inserted into the film. So it was kind of ironic watching a film about censor and edit things that's made from a book that's opposed to censorship and editing. So that was sort of a problem for me as someone who's read the book and appreciated and enjoyed the message. To watch someone have that opportunity and the funding to you have this golden opportunity now to put that story back out into the public square and the messaging and whatever, and you went back in and you did the very things that the author was against. It was problematic for me watching it. There was no version in this movie of the mechanical hound, which that was disappointing. Here was an opportunity to do something that the author was sort of foreseeing down into the future, and you did nothing with it. There was no mechanical hound. He completely flipped the script, and instead of having Guy, who's the protagonist, take out his superior when the whole thing comes down to a confrontation, he flips it and has the protagonist killed at the conclusion of this story. So that was another massive change. Another massive change was that the protagonist in this version of Fahrenheit 451, this movie version released this year, he's not married. Okay, so in the story, Guy is married, and there's this juxtaposition that he sees between the daughter of his neighbor and the sort of inquisitiveness and she's a conversationalist, and she's observant of things about nature, and she's asking questions, and she's alive, and it creates this contrast between what's going on in his daily life at home. And he realizes that his wife is addicted to drugs. She's wrapped up in mass media. She's got these screens. She's on the screens all day. She's more connected with the fantasies in media than she is even with him. He can't even remember how they met or got married. And so there's this sort of this mask that comes off of his eyes about the fact that the kind of life that they're living isn't really living at all. It isn't life because no one is talking to each other. No one has real relationships. And no one knows how to even have conversations about things that are transparent or vulnerable. And books are banned in this society. And that the mask starts to come off because there's this contrast between his conversations with his neighbor's daughter and the things that are going on at home. But in the movie version, the protagonist isn't married at all, so there is none of that. And they turn the Clarice character into a love interest, but she's like selling stuff on the black market. She's this sort of subversive criminal type character herself. So yeah, that was a strange piece that was thrown into it. You start to see these weird ideas start to stack up, and I think the overall result here was that I was disappointed. There were things visually that I did like about what he was doing. There were things about, I thought the actors, were all doing a good job. I didn't have any issues with casting or anything like that. I feel like the issues were with the director and the writer here of the choices that they made to take things out that were important components of the story and didn't need to be removed to tell the story in a compelling way. So that was disappointing. But I do feel like Fahrenheit 451 is still an important story for today. Because actually today, here in California, I believe they're going to be deciding, the Appropriations Committee are going to be deciding on AB 2943. It's going to be going to the Senate floor, and I guess we'll be hearing more about this. But listen, if you read Fahrenheit 451 as a kid like I did, and you understand why the First Amendment, the freedom of expression, the freedom of religion and the expression of that, and the freedom of speech, why that is so key and central to what it means to be an American, and why it is so ironic that right here in America, down at the Capitol building in Sacramento, they're proposing a bill that would basically ban the sale of books that have speech in them that they decided they don't like, and that would prohibit people who want to seek therapy or help in dealing with gender-related issues can no longer receive that kind of counsel or help because they're going to ban it in the state of California. So, I'll just put some links in here below. You can check out some of these conversations and what's going on here in Sacramento. But this cuts right to the core of a book and of the subsequent movies that have been made out of it that discuss this very topic. I think it's important that we recognize this, and that especially if you're watching this and you are a Californian, that you connect with your representatives. Look, you may or may not agree with the content of every book that's sold in the state. You may or may not agree with the choices that people make or the messages that people have to share, but you have to, well, I would think that as an American, you would agree that everyone has the right to put that out into the public square, that books have a right to be, you know, that books authors have a right to publish their books, and people have a right to purchase them if they want to, and that if people want to seek help because they are dealing with a gender-related issue and they would like to change that, that they have a right to seek that out. This has everything to do with Fahrenheit 451 and the issues related to the freedom of thought and freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And I hope that again, if you are a Californian watching this, I'll post some links below. I hope that you do connect with your representatives and tell them, look, I don't want California going in the direction of Fahrenheit 451, where books are being banned, certain kinds of speech or certain kinds of thought are prohibited now because somebody finds it offensive. That's not who we are as an American people. We just yesterday celebrated the 4th of July, and that hard-won independence because the colonies here did everything that they could to deal with the overbearing government in England, and won a hard-fought victory doing so. George Washington, I want to get this quote right, and I'll try to post it below too, in case, because I'm paraphrasing, I'm totally going off memory. But George Washington said something about the freedom of speech. He said, you know, the freedom of speech is so important that if it were to be removed, then we could be led back into enslavement to tyranny, mute as sheep. I'm totally slaughtering that quote, but I'll post it below. But listen, the people who created this country understood, and that's why the Bill of Rights was created, to protect the freedom and the liberty of individuals to express themselves. This review's gone on too long, but I did want to talk about this film. It has an important message to it. I think just for the sake of entertainment purposes, I think, yeah, it's worth watching. But really, if you want to get the real message of the book, get the book. Because unfortunately, this most recent version of the film did the very thing that the author was trying to say, let's not do this. And the director pulled stuff out, turned it around, changed it, and in many cases, I think unnecessarily so, which is a sad statement about the state of where our mass media is today. Because authors like Ray Bradbury, while they didn't have a crystal ball to look into the future, they were intuitive, and they were looking into the human condition, and they could certainly look back over the trash heap of history and see where this trend goes once we let go of the value of our freedoms.